My name is Rosa Martinez, and I almost ended my life on a Tuesday night in March, sitting on the bathroom floor of my studio apartment in Houston with a bottle of sleeping pills in one hand and my phone in the other, trying to decide whether to call my mother in Guatemala City to say goodbye. The irony wasn't lost on me that I had dedicated my career to saving lives as a registered nurse, yet I couldn't find a way to save my own. The depression had been building for months, maybe years, like water behind a dam that was finally ready to burst, taking everything I had worked for along with it. I came to America when I was 14, crossing the border with my Aunt Carmen after my father was murdered by gang members who wanted him to pay protection money for his small grocery store. My mother sold everything we owned to pay for my journey north, making the impossible choice to send me away so I could live while she stayed behind to care for my aging grandparents. "You are our hope," she told me the night before I left, pressing a small wooden cross into my hands. "You will become someone important in America, and then you can help all of us." At 14, carrying my family's dreams felt like an honor. At 32, it felt like a death sentence. The early years in Houston were hard but manageable. I lived with Carmen and her 3 children in a cramped apartment where I slept on the couch and learned English by watching telenovelas with subtitles and studying library books until my eyes burned. I worked part-time at a laundromat after school, sending every spare dollar back to Guatemala while maintaining perfect grades because anything less would mean I had wasted my family's sacrifice. I graduated valedictorian from my high school, earned a full scholarship to the University of Houston, and completed my nursing degree in 4 years while working nights at a hospital cafeteria. Becoming a nurse felt like achieving the American dream my family had envisioned. I found work at Memorial Hermann Hospital in the ICU, where my bilingual skills and cultural competency made me invaluable for treating the growing population of Latino patients. My starting salary was more money than my father had ever made from his grocery store, and I was finally able to send substantial support back home. I rented my own apartment, bought a used car, and even started saving for a down payment on a house. From the outside, I was the perfect success story, the immigrant who had made it through hard work and determination. But success came with a price I hadn't anticipated. Every achievement felt hollow because it highlighted how much my family was still struggling in Guatemala. My mother developed diabetes but couldn't afford proper medication. My younger brother dropped out of school to work construction because I couldn't send enough money to support both his education and my grandmother's medical expenses. Every phone call home brought news of another crisis that required money I was already stretching to provide. The American dream I was living felt like a betrayal of the people who had sacrificed everything to make it possible. The anxiety started subtly, manifesting as sleepless nights spent calculating and recalculating my budget, trying to figure out how to send more money home without falling behind on my own bills. I would lie awake until 3 in the morning, my mind racing through worst-case scenarios. What if my mother's diabetes got worse? What if my brother couldn't find steady work? What if something happened to my grandmother and I couldn't afford to fly home for her funeral? The weight of being my family's financial lifeline pressed down on my chest like a physical force, making it hard to breathe. Working in the ICU added another layer of stress that I initially dismissed as normal job pressure. I watched patients die despite our best efforts, held the hands of family members receiving devastating news, and made split-second decisions that could mean the difference between life and death. The emotional toll of healthcare work is significant for any nurse, but as an undocumented immigrant for most of my career, I felt additional pressure to be perfect, to never make mistakes that could draw unwanted attention or jeopardize my path to legal status. The depression crept in gradually, disguised as exhaustion from working double shifts to maximize my overtime pay. I started calling in sick more frequently, not because I was physically ill, but because I couldn't summon the emotional energy to face another 12-hour shift of life and death decisions. Simple tasks like grocery shopping or doing laundry became overwhelming obstacles that I would put off for days. I stopped cooking the traditional Guatemalan foods that had always connected me to home, living instead on whatever was easiest: takeout, frozen meals, energy bars eaten standing up in my kitchen. My social life, which had never been robust due to my work schedule and financial constraints, disappeared entirely. I stopped accepting invitations from coworkers who wanted to grab drinks after difficult shifts. I avoided the Guatemalan community events that Carmen still attended, unable to face the questions about my success and the expectations that I should be grateful for my opportunities. The isolation fed the depression, which increased the isolation, creating a cycle that pulled me deeper into darkness with each rotation. The panic attacks began during my 7th year as a nurse, triggered initially by a code blue situation where, despite our team's efforts, we lost a young father of 3. As I performed CPR on his unresponsive body, I suddenly couldn't breathe, my vision tunneled, and my hands started shaking so violently that I had to step back from the resuscitation. A colleague took over while I escaped to a supply closet, gasping for air and convinced I was having a heart attack. The episode lasted only minutes, but it left me terrified of when it might happen again. The attacks became more frequent and less predictable. They would strike during routine patient care, in the middle of grocery shopping, or while I was talking to my mother on the phone. My heart would race, my palms would sweat, and I would feel an overwhelming sense of impending doom that seemed to come from nowhere. I started avoiding situations that might trigger attacks, which meant avoiding more and more of life. I would sit in my car in the hospital parking lot for 20 minutes before each shift, trying to calm my racing heart and prepare myself for the possibility of an attack in front of patients or colleagues. The breaking point came during a particularly difficult week when 3 separate crises hit simultaneously. My grandmother was hospitalized in Guatemala with pneumonia, requiring expensive treatment that insurance wouldn't cover. My brother called to say he had been laid off from his construction job and couldn't find new work. And at the hospital, I made a medication error, not a dangerous one, but significant enough to require incident reports and meetings with my supervisor. The combination of family crisis, financial pressure, and professional shame created a perfect storm of anxiety and depression that overwhelmed every coping mechanism I had developed. That Tuesday night, I came home from a particularly brutal shift where we had lost 2 patients, including a young woman who reminded me of myself at 14, full of dreams and determination that had been cut short by circumstances beyond her control. I sat on my bathroom floor, surrounded by the sleeping pills I had been prescribed for insomnia but rarely used, and seriously considered whether my family would be better off with my life insurance payout than with my continued struggle to support them. The logical part of my mind knew this thinking was distorted, but the depression had created a fog so thick that I couldn't see any other solutions. I picked up my phone to call my mother, intending to hear her voice one last time, but instead found myself dialing the suicide prevention hotline. I'm still not sure what stopped me from going through with it. Maybe the cross my mother had given me 18 years earlier, still hanging around my neck, or maybe the small voice in my head that whispered that my story didn't have to end this way. The crisis counselor who answered spoke to me in Spanish when I struggled to find English words for my pain, and for the first time in months, I felt heard and understood by another human being. That phone call saved my life, but it was just the beginning of a long journey toward healing and recovery. The counselor helped me develop a safety plan for the immediate crisis and connected me with a bilingual therapist who specialized in working with immigrant communities. Dr. Elena Ramirez understood the unique pressures I faced as an undocumented immigrant supporting family members in another country, the survivor's guilt that came with achieving success while others suffered, and the cultural barriers that had prevented me from seeking help sooner. Depression in immigrant communities often looks different from the textbook descriptions, Dr. Ramirez explained during one of our early sessions. It's not just individual sadness, it's the weight of carrying multiple generations of hopes and dreams, the trauma of separation from family and homeland, and the constant stress of navigating systems that weren't designed for people like us. Your depression isn't a personal failing, it's a normal response to abnormal circumstances. Therapy helped me understand that the guilt I felt about my success was a form of survivor's syndrome, common among immigrants who achieve upward mobility while family members remain in poverty or dangerous situations. Dr. Ramirez taught me techniques for managing anxiety attacks, including breathing exercises and grounding techniques that I could use even during high-stress situations at work. More importantly, she helped me develop a more realistic understanding of my responsibilities to my family and my own mental health. The decision to start taking antidepressants was difficult, complicated by both cultural stigma around mental health and practical concerns about cost and side effects. In Guatemalan culture, depression is often seen as a spiritual weakness or a failure to be grateful for God's blessings. I worried that my family would view medication as evidence that I was ungrateful for the opportunities one had been given. Dr. Ramirez helped me understand that antidepressants weren't a sign of weakness, but a tool for treating a medical condition, just like insulin for diabetes or blood pressure medication for hypertension. The medication didn't provide instant relief, but gradually I began to feel like I was surfacing from underwater. The constant fog of despair lifted enough for me to engage more effectively in therapy and to start implementing the coping strategies Dr. Ramirez was teaching me. I learned to recognize the early warning signs of panic attacks and develop techniques for managing them before they became overwhelming. I practiced setting boundaries around my financial support for family members, recognizing that bankrupting myself emotionally and financially wouldn't help anyone in the long run. One of the most important breakthroughs came when I finally told my mother about my struggle with depression and my suicide attempt. I had expected her to be disappointed or ashamed, but instead she revealed that she had battled similar feelings after my father's death and my departure for America. "I thought I was the only one who felt this heaviness," she said during our video call, tears streaming down her face. "I thought it meant I wasn't strong enough or faithful enough. But maybe this sadness is just what happens when life becomes too much to carry alone." That conversation opened the door to more honest communication with my family about mental health, financial stress, and the realistic limits of what I could provide from Houston. My brother found a new job and started contributing more to my grandmother's care. My mother connected with a support group at her church for women dealing with depression and anxiety. We developed a more sustainable plan for financial support that didn't require me to sacrifice my own basic needs and mental health. At work, I gradually began opening up to trusted colleagues about my mental health struggles. I was surprised to discover that several other nurses had experienced similar challenges, and that the hospital had resources I hadn't known about, including an employee assistance program that provided free counseling and stress management workshops. My supervisor, when I finally told her about my anxiety attacks, was supportive and helped me develop strategies for managing symptoms during patient care without compromising safety. The recovery process wasn't linear or easy. I had setbacks, days when the depression felt as heavy as ever, and moments when the anxiety threatened to overwhelm me again. But gradually, I rebuilt my life with better boundaries, improved coping skills, and a support network that included both professional help and personal relationships. I started attending a support group for Latino healthcare workers, where I met others who understood the unique pressures of working in high-stress medical environments while supporting families in other countries. I also became involved in advocacy work around mental health in immigrant communities, speaking at community centers and churches about the importance of seeking professional help and challenging cultural stigmas around depression and anxiety. Many of the people I spoke with expressed relief at hearing someone from their own community acknowledge that mental health struggles were real and treatable, not spiritual failures or signs of ingratitude. My relationship with work evolved as I learned to practice better self-care and set more realistic expectations for myself. I reduced my overtime hours and used the extra time for activities that supported my mental health. Regular exercise, cooking traditional foods that connected me to my heritage, and maintaining friendships with colleagues and community members. I also pursued additional training in trauma-informed care, recognizing that many of our Latino patients were dealing with their own immigration-related trauma and mental health challenges. The financial pressures that had contributed to my depression were addressed through better budgeting and more sustainable approaches to supporting my family. I worked with a financial counselor to develop a realistic plan for sending money home while also building my own emergency fund and retirement savings. This required difficult conversations with family members about what I could and couldn't afford, but ultimately created a more sustainable system that didn't require me to sacrifice my own basic needs. My mother's health improved significantly once she gained access to better diabetes management resources, partly funded by my support, but also through programs available in Guatemala for low-income patients. My brother completed a vocational training program and found steady work as an electrician. My grandmother lived comfortably for 3 more years before passing peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by family. I was able to return to Guatemala for her funeral, the first time I had seen my family in person in over a decade. The experience of overcoming suicidal depression fundamentally changed my perspective on success and the American dream. I realized that achievement without mental health and personal relationships is hollow, that supporting family members requires setting sustainable boundaries, and that seeking help for mental health challenges is a sign of strength rather than weakness. I also understood that my individual success was meaningless if it came at the cost of my own well-being, or if it prevented me from being truly present for the people I was trying to help. Today, I work as a charge nurse in the ICU and also facilitate mental health workshops for immigrant healthcare workers through a partnership between the hospital and local community organizations. I've been in therapy for 4 years now, and while I no longer need weekly sessions, I continue to check in with Dr. Ramirez monthly to maintain my mental health and process ongoing challenges. I take antidepressants daily and have learned to view them as essential medication rather than a source of shame. The relationship with my family has become healthier and more honest. We talk openly about mental health, financial stress, and the realistic expectations we can have for supporting each other across international borders. My mother has become an advocate for mental health awareness in her own community, sharing our story with other families dealing with similar challenges. My brother and I have developed a closer relationship as adults, bonded by our shared understanding of the pressures that come with being part of an immigrant family. Key resources and solutions that made the difference. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, 988, provides 24/7 crisis support in multiple languages, including Spanish, and connects callers with local resources for ongoing mental health care. The National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI, offers support groups and educational programs specifically designed for Latino/Hispanic communities, addressing cultural stigma and providing culturally competent resources. Community health centers often provide sliding-scale mental health services for uninsured or underinsured immigrants, including bilingual therapists who understand immigration-related trauma. Employee assistance programs at many workplaces offer free, confidential counseling services and can provide referrals to long-term mental health treatment. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA, maintains a treatment locator that helps find mental health providers who speak Spanish and understand immigrant community needs. Immigrant rights organizations often provide mental health resources and advocacy support, recognizing that deportation fears and legal stress contribute significantly to anxiety and depression. Cultural and religious organizations, including churches and community centers, increasingly offer mental health education and support groups that address stigma while respecting cultural values. Telehealth services have made mental health care more accessible for immigrants in areas with limited Spanish-speaking providers, allowing access to culturally competent therapy regardless of geographic location. Today, when I speak to other immigrants struggling with depression and anxiety, I tell them that mental health is not a luxury or a sign of weakness. It's a necessity for survival and success in America. The pressures we face as immigrants are real and significant, but they don't have to destroy us. Seeking help requires courage, but it's the most important step toward building a life that honors both our sacrifices and our dreams. Your mental health matters, not just for your own sake, but for the family and community members who depend on you being whole and healthy.